So Todd Petersen, my dear friend and colleague, who I think is brilliant in so many ways. There's a concept that you and I discussed at one point that I think is going to be super valuable for teachers and parents. And one of the most valuable things is that you gave it a name. I came at you with like 100 words about this thing I've been practicing, and you said, "Oh yeah, it's this," and it was a one-word thing, and it was brilliant. And so the practice or the topic or the idea that we were talking about is basically the value of removing ourselves from the learning experience that we've designed for kids or whoever, and how that changes what is learned and the motivation for the learning and all of those things. And we'll give specific examples. But as I was thinking I was so brilliant describing this to you one day, you just said, "Oh yeah, I call that
Gandalfing."
And that's when I began to despise you as a human being. No, it's so wonderful how literary types like yourself can just condense something that has so much in it into a word that really conveys the whole thing by itself. So will you describe what is Gandalfing? What is that practice and that technique?
So let me start outside of the story, and then I think it'll make sense once we get closer to thinking about this great wizard. There's a thing that has to happen sometimes, often when we're teaching, which is we have to leave the learners to learn. We have to let them have agency. We have to let them fail and assess and regroup. And they need to do this on their own. And there's all kinds of really great research out there about that. But in order to avoid creating dependencies and to reward and reinforce dependencies, sometimes our presence in the room, in the space where learning is happening, can be a distraction. And it can be a hard medicine sometimes for teachers to realize that they're the impediment sometimes. Because, and it doesn't matter how good of a teacher you are. Sometimes just being in the room means that when a learner is moving along and hits a bump, their head goes up, they look around for the person who can help. And sometimes it's important, and not just for theater, for them to look up and find no one there. And it sounds so cruel, I think, to a lot of people, like, but what? That's what a teacher is. That's what an adult is. That's what a parent is. But this kind of arm's length is important. So when we take it back and we go, oh, hey, we realize that there was a great hero from a great story who tried to get a whole bunch of dwarfs and hobbits ready to be heroes. And he did that by leading them on an adventure, maybe even structuring the adventure. And then at very key moments, removing himself. Now, Gandalf, we know from the whole story, he had to go from being Gandalf the Grey to being Gandalf the White. He had to transform himself. He had work of his own to do. So Gandalfing isn't neglect. Gandalf isn't just letting people hang. Gandalfing is being knowledgeable enough to know when it is time for you to be absent. And there's this moment that's in the movie, but it's not in the books, where he says, a wizard is never early or late. He arrives exactly when he means to, right? And I want to help teachers get that sixth sense of being able to read the room and read the moment and read the situation and go, it is time for me to be somewhere else. And I like that even better than being gone, because of course we're never gone, right? There's continuity in our existence. Even if a teacher leaves the classroom, or in the case of now, our homes, goes down, grabs a little something, comes back, you are somewhere else. You haven't just disappeared. And then you reappear at an opportune moment to do other kind of work, to help assess, to praise, to help troubleshoot any of the kinds of things that the learner may be asking for or whatever, or sometimes what they do not know that they need. Because, Gandalf did oftentimes return going, what's happened here? Okay, I'll help. But that also, I think, is an interesting kind of relationship to think about, because it's natural and it's human to recognize.
Absolutely.
I'm coming back into this process. So anyways, initially when I named the concept, because I certainly didn't think the concept up, really good teachers and parents have been doing this forever. It's actually a really pretty, if we want to talk about traditional, like deep within the various cultures of the world to teach this way.
Absolutely.
It's important, but I think having that kind of more current name has helped me think about it. And every time I've brought it up in a workshop, people have gone, "Ah, yes, that's the thing I want to be.
Mm-hmm.
That's the
Absolutely.
way I want to do it."
Yeah. So there's a couple things come to mind as you say that. One is, I think it's also really important to remember as adults and as teachers, parents or teachers in whatever role, is that it's actually critical for us to not be there sometimes without having designed the environment and sort of used not being there as a teaching tool. Sometimes our learners just need to identify the goals for themselves, how they're going to get there, no matter what it is, where we're not involved at all. And then sometimes when we are involved, when we are designing or supporting learning environments very explicitly, this technique can be really, really powerful, as you describe. One thing that I would say about it that I think is important, at least in my practicing of it, is that I found that the motivation for the task has to be at a certain level for it to work, right? If I'm in a classroom or working with, I mean, I do this with adults in corporate work too. If I'm coaching somebody in how to run co-creative meetings and how to facilitate and be a coach, sometimes I will disappear from that meeting that we were going to do together because they've been relying on me to kind of frame and shape and give them kind of nods of, yes, that's the way to go. And they need to know that they're capable of doing it on their own. So they stop using those resources to be looking at me and looking for validation, et cetera.
Can that be weird though sometimes when you're in a contractual arrangement where they're like, you're supposed to be giving me something, right? So this I think happens in parental relationships and teaching relationships where they go, I have an obligation, don't I, to do something?
Yes.
And the answer can be, you are doing something when you put yourself somewhere else.
That's a great point.
That restraint, it's not withholding, it's not neglect. It's calculated, it's intentional, and it's by design. And that's the thing that I would say, parents want to get this started. Don't think of this as neglect. Don't think of this as not doing something. You are very intentionally moving yourself somewhere else in order to affect an outcome. Don't think you're just disappearing, because that is not what this is.
Absolutely. Yeah. And I think, I think that's absolutely true. And there are tons of examples, whether it's in a school context or, I mean, this often works better outside of normal school contexts, right? Because the learner doesn't have an inherent motivation to continue the journey. So an example would be if there's a math worksheet, right? As a teacher or a parent, hey, math worksheet, time to do math. And then we leave the room, odds are that math worksheet is just not going to get done. Or if they run into an obstacle that they can't figure out immediately themselves, they're just going to stop and wait till we're back in the room. There's no motivating factor to keep them pushing through. The merry adventurers in The Hobbit and The Lord of the Rings, they have to keep moving. There's this goal that they have that they absolutely have to achieve. They have this drive to do it. So what I've found is that a strong motivator is social engagement and social interaction as one way to do it. There are others, but I'll give an example of a Gandalfing moment where I reached out to and texted and say, hey, I just Gandalfed my daughter, is that social is huge. And so, I said to my daughter, hey, sweetie, grandma's home alone and she really values talking with other people. And I wonder if we could call her. And so we called her and I said, but I'm going to kind of hang back. I'd love for you to talk to her. She said, well, I want you here, when we make the call or whatever. And then we started the call and they were talking. And then I kind of quietly walked out of the room, and she noticed me leaving and kind of gave me the look of like, what? But then kept the conversation going in a normal way. And kept it going and concluded it in a very normal human way that wasn't awkward or weird or whatever. And the thing is, if I had been there, as I've been often on calls with her, with grandma and others, there's always this, what should I be saying? Or how do I do it? Dad, will you take over the conversation? I'm feeling a little awkward. She had a wonderful conversation with her grandmother where she was perfectly able to do it. And I think the biggest learning for her, as we talked about it later, as I apologized for doing that, is that she now knows that she can conduct a call with her grandmother on her own. And there's no way for me to teach her that she can do that with me there. I can't convince her that it's possible. And so sometimes, and it's that social element. We have the social drive to not just, oh, teacher's gone, hang up on human. Right? Not going to hang up on grandma. There's this social drive to continue with that conversation.
And you've said this so many times. Sometimes when we step away, there's this sense like, well, how are we going to like make them do the work? And what you're talking about here is, well, because they have to keep it going. They have responsibility. Walking out like you did wasn't just to not be there. It was to say, I trust you. You will do a good job because I know you.
Absolutely.
And if
That's
people,
a great point.
if learners felt that more often, or employees felt that more often, then we would have something. I had this sort of saved along the side for getting to where this works. I wanted to put my money where my mouth was because I knew we were going to have this conversation. And when my son, who's 9 years old, was begging for Roblox on the computer, I said, look, that's not something I want to work on right now. He went ahead on his own and downloaded Roblox onto the computer. And then I had a very serious conversation where I said, you know what, this is probably okay, but when you start downloading things, that's when trouble can happen. And I explained to him about malware, and I explained to him about everything else. And he got this horrified look on his face. And then I didn't do anything. I just said, I just needed you to know that this is why I have said no. Later, I found him taking all of his Lego and toys and putting them in a box in his closet. And when I asked him what was happening, I said, what are you doing, Max? And when he's really upset, he won't talk to me, but he'll write. And he said, I don't know if it's backwards.
Wow. No, it reads, yeah.
Grounding myself.
Wow.
He felt that his infraction was sufficient for him to enact a punishment upon himself, which is not punishment. It's self-discipline. And he was enacting it with some of the theater that we normally use. And I said, son, put those things back. You don't need to do that. What we've done so far is sufficient. But it felt amazing, like, to be heard as a parent, for him to understand the concept. And I think, wouldn't we like that level of self-regulation out of everybody? Like, now that I understand what I've done, I'm in there. So I offer that to parents to say, sometimes you think maybe the important thing that needs to happen won't happen if I'm not there to monitor. Maybe not.
Yeah.
Maybe.
I think there's something interesting about the idea of what things can I do to make me, to give myself some feedback or incentive to not do this thing again. And the fact that his mind went to grounding as a way to do that is an interesting thing in itself, right? Like, what are the things that help us remember to not do things next time? And so we might say to ourselves, like, boy, I'm not going to allow myself to buy lattes every day this week, because I was not financially responsible with something last week. And I want to feel that every day and be reminded of it. And sometimes we can kind of create those extrinsic motivations for ourselves that actually by default or by definition are actually intrinsic because we're the ones that came up with them. So I really like that.
It's a way to hack some important systems that we don't know about.
Yeah.
And so, yeah, remove yourself from the situation. Allow a person the humanity and the agency to act with the knowledge that they already have.
Yeah,
And then how can they push forward, because you have allowed them that one human right that we all want, which is to be agents. I mean, and that goes into Dan Pink territory and everything, right? People want autonomy, mastery, and a sense of purpose. If we can instill that in the people that we live with and work with and are trying to teach and learn from and whatever, then there's power. But coercive approaches, you know, they're very short-lived, and they usually
short-lived and long-lived at the same time, right? Because the behavior we wanted to change is short-lived, but the lessons we're teaching about power and how to manipulate other people are forever lessons.
Right.
Which I think is really important to remember. So that actually is a great segue, I think, into how I think we might wrap this up, which is, what are some ways that we can misuse Gandalfing, right? What are some ways that we could, adults, in my experience, are notorious for taking really good ideas and filtering them through our understanding of what we're supposed to be doing for or to or with kids and breaking it. And an example I'll give is mindfulness in school, right? Great idea. I've seen people get detention for talking during mindfulness in schools. So, right, so we can break everything. Let's just admit it as adults that think our role is power over kids, et cetera. So what are some ways that that Gandalfing might go wrong? One that comes to mind for me, I'll share immediately, which is, that, like, basically it's that idea of, I want to toughen you up for life. And so I'm going to, drop you in the worst neighborhood in the city and just hope you make it home. Right. And you're going to, like, that could be a form, we could convince ourselves that's gambling. Or like a boy named Sue, right? Johnny Cash, I'm going to name you Sue so that you have to fight every 10 minutes.
Yeah. When you're talking about that, I told people, it's like, look, it's not Escape from New York. You're not dropping people. Exactly. And if they get out, then cool, you learned everything you need to. Yeah. I tell people when they're trying to try this out, that if it comes with any kind of talk that is about, like, this is to toughen you up, or I wash my hands, you're not Gandalfing when you're saying, I am not going to be part of that thing that you're doing. You can do that on your own. Yeah. That's not the thing. The intentionality needs to be, this is amazing, I need to leave. Mm-hmm. And I think if you're in that space, that's a good kind of regulatory thing. But again, if you're saying, I'm going to toughen you up, like you said, and if you're saying, I wash my hands of this ridiculous pursuit, that's a way to do this. And I think the parent language that we hear a lot of the teachers, you want to do that, fine. If you want to do that, you can do it without me. Mm-hmm. And I don't think that's what it is.
Definitely not Gandalfing in that sense. Yeah, I think one way too to kind of judge, whether, like that case with my daughter, you could say, but boy, that was kind of manipulative, and is that ethical to kind of go into a phone call? I mean, I went into that phone call knowing I was going to Gandalf her. And, is that, and could that breed some lack of trust that this person says they're going to go on a journey with me, and then from patterns of past behavior, they bail on me during the journey half the time. And so I think that's a fair question, right? We should look for that. I think a way to know whether we're doing it in the right way is to reflect with the other participant afterwards and repeatedly around, what was that like? Hey, I want to recognize that in a way, maybe it felt like I betrayed you there, that I had implied I was going to do something, and then I kind of reneged on that promise. And I want to connect on that with you, because I just want to let you know my reasoning for doing that. And I wonder, what do you feel that was like to see that you could actually do that on your own? That's why I did it. I wanted you to know what I know, which is that you're perfectly capable of having a conversation with your grandmother on your own. How does it feel to know that now? And do you forgive me that, that tactic that I used? Because if that in itself is traumatizing, it can be traumatizing for young kids, especially if we leave them alone in a scary place. And what's scary to them is different than what's scary to us. Alone on a call with grandma could be scary to them. And that could be a memory they remember forever of, I was scared in that moment and I was abandoned. So I would just say, be very careful with it. Don't assume because it wouldn't be scary or traumatic to you that it won't be scary or traumatic, especially to a much younger person.
And I think that's the coming back is the important part. When you're gone and you come back, you may even need to increase the connection, the empathy, the love. And but I use a lot of language that's redirecting to them. Look what you did. This is fantastic. You've moved the needle, and all that other kind of stuff. But I would say that the other thing that you can do to help other people, because particularly with your own kids, your own family, they'll start to sense a pattern. And once my kids know my moves, they're like, oh, is he Gandalfing?
Do I really want to go on this journey with him?
So I try to use pattern and anomaly, so that I am regularly, intentionally using this technique when they're not expecting me to. So I'll do it on something easy, then switch to doing it on something difficult. And then I'll be gone for a certain period of time and then return. And then maybe I'll only be gone for a brief span, so that they're getting this sense. But I think that what you have to do is come back and reassure them that they're safe at the conclusion of it. So when I was working for the YMCA, I used to do high ropes courses. I think we've talked about that. And we used to talk all about that fear was really important. You go on a high ropes course because you're supposed to experience fear, but it's perceived fear. And that's how we would process out the experience afterwards. And we would say, statistically, you're safer here in the high ropes than you are sleeping in bed. But here's why we wanted you to have that experience, because it's teaching you to master your fear and to come up with strategies for processing your fear out. Sometimes I think Malcolm Gladwell has written about this in Blink, like stress inoculation. If we recognize that that's what we're doing for the people we're working with, it's stress inoculation. How is that all going to happen when we need to, when we really are going to be in a situation when there really is nobody there?
How's it feel to get Gandalfed, yo?
I just got my chill on and went for mindfulness.
What would have been, if I was really going to Gandalf somebody there, right? I would have set it up like, hey, this is our one shot. We need to make sure we open this and close this session tightly so that we can ship this off to production. And then you would have kicked in there and gone, oh, looks like we lost Aaron. Hey, everybody, thanks for joining. Be sure to subscribe, right?
What I thought instead was, oh my gosh, Aaron's wife must have just come out of the shower and didn't know that he was recording. because we were doing that. My wife came out. She was working in the garden. She took a shower, and she came out, and she's like, "Oh my gosh, wait a minute. Are you zooming right now?" And I was like, "Nope,
Yeah.
just didn't do
Yeah,
that."
that's
But what I did, this was what my thought was. I'm like, "Oh, something's going on. I am going to take this to the end of the beat."
to the
And
end of
then,
the beat.
and then I'm going to sit, because if this has to be edited later. So it was a kind of a cool thing to think about, like, what can I do to contribute to the team effort, which is going to be processing this out for later. Keeping talking maybe wasn't going to be the right thing. So what was it that our friend, the anthropologist, I sat
Yeah,
with the
Brian
space.
Rill, Dr. Brian Rill.
I sat with the space. I got to where I was done and sat there. And I'll tell you, it was really uncomfortable. Is this the right thing? The recording's still going. And maybe that's one of the things we can teach people too. Maybe they aren't going to be able to proceed while we're Gandalfing, but if we can teach them to sit and hold the space, that's a pretty grown up and mature thing I do not always do.
Well demonstrated, sir. Mr. Todd Petersen, wonderful author, by the way. Check out his first novel, It Needs to Look Like We Tried. I don't read new fiction. I loved that book. And by the way, his second book title, please.
Picnic in the Ruins.
Is coming out.
This time next year. They're saying early 2021. It's going
I have
to
to wait
copy
that
editors
long.
as we speak. Well, yeah, it's going into production now, so. But we'll see that. I'll see if I can get you an advanced reader copy since you're a special dude.
Yeah, no, I've been looking forward to this book for a long time. Todd, thank you so much for sharing your thoughts and perspective and experience with parents and teachers who might get to see this. And with me, as always, I benefit immensely every time we get to chat. And I really look forward to the next time, which will hopefully be soon.
And keep doing the good work, Aaron Eden. This is important stuff now more than ever.
Yeah, brother. Okay. Love to the family, and I will see you soon.
Take care.